Let me just quickly just say this, though. I think it's really important that, unlike some people perhaps, I'm very, very careful in saying that coaching is not a business. Coaching is a skill. And I think once we recognize that coaching is a skill first and foremost, that's the right attitude to have. And I think too often people think coaching is a business. It's not, any more than fixing a pipe as a business. You know, if you were to become a plumber, fixing the pipe is the skill you develop. How you then create a plumbing business is a separate activity. And it's really important to say that, because it's too easy to think, oh, I'm going to become a coach, and then somehow that's a business. It's not, it's a skill. You have to deploy that skill in a certain context that equals value proposition to somebody who then pays you money. That's what business is, right? So we then need to kind of separate in our heads that there are two parts: becoming a great coach and then creating a business system that enables us to charge for that coaching. And they're two very different journeys. And not everybody wants to do that journey. Some people want to develop a coaching skill to take it into an organization as a manager, as an internal coach, whatever it might be. Other people want to develop an independent practice where they do charge money. And kind of knowing where you sit is an important step as well. Because one of the things I know for sure from doing 8 years of mentoring of coaches is that the skill of doing this bit, the business part, needs another journey, if you like, of learning. It means you need to read other books, or you need to learn how to sell yourself, or how to network, or how to market yourself. These things are all different from the skill of sitting down with a human being and having a conversation. You know, and I'm thinking, you know what? More and more and more, coaching is becoming transformational. Like, I think that where Animas is where coaching is going to be. And I'm almost thinking like the old style of coaching almost doesn't have a place anymore. I've never said that, not so blatantly, and I might be wrong in saying that, but it's what's coming up for me as I'm speaking, is that I think transformational coaching is coaching now. And I think those who don't operate as transformational coaches in the future simply won't be able to be coaches other than at a very basic level within a performance context, within a workplace. I just don't see how you can survive as a coach if you don't have transformational skills in the long run, to be honest. And it could be that one day we just scrap that word transformational, because that is coaching one day. I don't know. But we'll certainly explore how it's different from what's been before. I do believe that you can be a generic coach, but it tends to work on a local basis. So if you're, let's say you live in somewhere like, I don't know, think of a small town, Chichester. I don't know why it comes to my mind, but Chichester. You could probably survive as a local coach in Chichester, being a general coach. If you're in London, you probably couldn't. So you would then need to develop some sort of speciality or some focus, that sort of thing. But having said that, you know, one of the most successful coaches in the country is what you might call a generic life coach, a guy called Michael Serwer, who last year turned over around $500,000 in coaching fees. He's super exceptional. I mean, don't pretend for a second that's normal for a coach. So like that's unusual. But nonetheless, he's a generic coach. Now, what's different about Michael is his style. He attracts the right people based on who he is as a coach, what he calls a no BS coach. So sometimes it's not a niche, sometimes it's about who you are as a person that attracts the right people. So much of what we now take for granted within coaching came from the impact of the Second World War. So I don't know if you're sort of conscious of this, but after the Second World War, there was clearly a lot of trauma. And so from there came the rise of the humanistic approach to counselling, which was Carl Rogers' work. There was the sense in which psychoanalysis, which was often done twice a day, 5 times a week, you have to be super rich for psychoanalysis back in the day when it first started under Freud and Jung. That was something that wasn't attainable by most people. And so after the Second World War, there was a need for some form of approach to cognitive stresses and emotional stresses, which Carl Rogers was the founder of to some degree with his person-centered therapy. And quite honestly, without Carl Rogers' work on person-centered therapy, we would not have coaching. It's as simple as that. It's like the heart and soul of coaching is person-centered theory, which we can start to explore in a second. Like, what is it that sits within that we take to be true that means that coaching can exist? Who's the best arbiter of whether it's successful or not, do you think? Yeah, totally. I would agree. I think the client, not the goal that's been predefined. What's amazing for me is how often a client will let go of the initial goal and go somewhere entirely different and feel it was a massive success, when if you were to measure yourself against the initially agreed goal, you go like, oh, I'm a rubbish coach. You're not. You've allowed the client to go where they needed to go. My answer to your question in brief is this, that it's the contract that decides. As in, what have you agreed to do to work together, and how are you recontracting as you go, such that you know you're on the same page together. As a coach, I don't have ever, anymore as a coach, I never have goals with my clients. It's just not who I am as a coach. Doesn't mean if I was a different kind of coach, I wouldn't have goals. I might do. But for me, I don't work with that kind of client. So the ultimate arbiter of success for the coaching is the client, who I'm always checking in on at some level. You know, how is this going for you? But not necessarily even verbally. It's more like, what's the energy like between us? If there's a sense of like distance or boredom, or you can feel when you're off track, hey, what's happening here? What do we need to do to get this back on track? However, if the contract is one of like say with an HR manager, and you're coaching somebody in an organization, clearly that's going to have elements to it which you need to meet as well. So I'd say the contract, both psychological and sometimes physical, is the thing that sets the goal or that sets the outcome. But you and your client are in a collaborative relationship. We're always checking in with each other. Where are we against that, or what else is emerging? Make sense? Again, it depends on the situation with the coach, the client, etc. In my case, I tend to work on a 5-session basis, and then see where we are. I have a particular bent towards clients who have what I call ontological grit. So ontology is the study of being, and I get curious about what is the piece of grit in your life and how you're being, not what you're doing, not what you know, but how you're being. Like, what's happening for you in your life that means that you're showing up in this way rather than that way, and how's that problematic for you? That could take 1 session, it could take 1,000 sessions, we don't know. So I tend to work on a revolving basis of 5 sessions and then see where we are. To be honest, I find things don't take as long as people think. It's surprising how much you can get achieved when you're really honest. Like, I think coaching at its heart is about courage. It's about the courage to name what's not being named. And when you have that courage to really go there, you'll be amazed how quickly change takes place. It's a step-by-step process, and I think the classic Hippocratic oath is do no harm, and I think that's rather the same in coaching. Like, you wouldn't expect Iveta to do the kind of work I do. Just because she's becoming a coach within our school doesn't mean she's going to do the work I do yet. I might be a brain surgeon, and right now Iveta's still fixing bones. That's okay. Not that you go from fixing bones to brain surgery, but you take my point. Is that you know, it's okay to do the work at this level initially as a coach because you're building your muscles, but at some point over time you will deepen and deepen and deepen your practice, so that you don't jump straight to the core. You start off here, you deepen your practice, and you find yourself working here. It takes time. I've been a coach for 18 years, so it takes time. It's a journey. You know, since I was trained as a coach back in 2000 or so, I've done a master's, I've 2 masters and 2 supervision courses, and you know, it's like you're always on a journey of deepening your practice, so you don't become the finished goods at the end of 6 months or so. So it's just building that muscle. I find very few people ever say, Nick, I want you to have the answers. You know, even sort of unconsciously, they're not really saying that. Apart from one guy, very interesting. I was coaching an Indian guy who he wanted to make a huge difference in the world. Like, he literally said to me he wanted to leave the kind of same legacy as Buddha. So he had, I mean, well, every 2,000 years we need somebody who does that. So you know, it might have been it was his time. But what was very curious to me was that every time he said he might do something, he said, "What do you think of that, Nick? What do you think of that, Nick? Do you think that's okay, Nick?" And I'd be like, and I said to him, "I'm really curious. At one level, you want to have this universal impact. Like, you want to be the Buddha, and yet you're constantly seeking my approval for what you're saying. What do you think is going on there for you?" So it's about utilizing the material that's happening in the space as actually part of the coaching journey. I could have been very political about it and diplomatic and said, "Hey, well, it's not what I think, is what you think." "Oh, it's not what I think, is what you think." I could have kept doing that, but that would have missed the point, because his actual saying that to me was material for me to say, what is that? It wasn't just about managing and putting it back to him, because that's just managing him. It's about saying, let's look at that thing, that you want to be this huge character, but you're seeking my approval. Let's take a look at that. So for me, in coaching, everything in coaching is material for coaching, everything. The way they show up, their behaviors, the way they don't show up, so if they're late, if they don't show up, if they cancel, all these things are first and foremost issues that become material for the coaching. I coached somebody years ago who, very, very difficult situation where her boyfriend had essentially agreed for her to be an escort, and although she did it to make money, she then felt super resentful years later that the boyfriend had gone along with it and let her be an escort, and she essentially, I would go as far as to say she begged me to coach her. Like, she was like, "Nick, I really want you to coach me." I was like, "Okay." Eventually I was like, "Okay, I will coach you." She turned up half an hour late for the first session. Now, I could have gone like, "Oh, unreliable client." No, I'm curious. Why would you beg somebody to coach them and then show up half an hour late? So I'm like, this is really curious. This is the conversation we had. This is the issue you're bringing to me, and you turn up half an hour late. What's that about? What's really going on here for you? Everything is material for the journey. And when you start to recognize that everything that we do as a human being is material for exploration, it becomes the richest space you can find. Does that make sense? Because you're not trying to go like, here are the boundaries, here's how I need to manage you, now let's do the work. No, this is the work. I often find that coaches ask questions like, we have a private Facebook group called Business Labs, which is where I basically do videos and share how you can grow a business as a coach, but not just business, but kind of like how to practice as a coach. And one of the questions I get a lot is something along the lines of, my client's turning up late, what shall I do to manage the contract? And I'm going, don't manage the contract. Treat it as material for coaching. First and foremost, treat it as material for coaching, because you're a coach before you're a business person. And if they're turning up late and you want to manage the contract, you're going to business before you go to coach. I'm curious, why are you late? What's happening for you? How is this showing up in your life? How's that commitment level showing up in your life elsewhere? And how's that causing problems for you as it's causing problems for us? That's a much more interesting conversation than, can you please turn up on time next time? Right? Which is where you're managing them. It's a beautiful world. I've got to say, coaching is the most beautiful process, because it's purely about dialogue and noticing everything that's in that space. Let me share a couple other bits. First of all, I want to go into transformational coaching, which I said I'd describe. It's this. It's a little bit of a nuance moving on from here.